So I had used ChatGPT for the data analytics part. The first part that I did was just ask it the question, inserted the data and the two questions that it asked and the hints, just straight from the analytics part. And then made sure to be aware to pertain to Excel. And then here they kind of gave me codes. I didn't really want to work with codes. So I had asked it, can you make the instructions not use a code? And here they fixed that for me. But I also wanted to be fixed that one, create a weak column because I feel like there's an easier way to do it. So I'd asked it, okay, can we just group the dates in the pivot table instead? Again, it did the whole step by step, fixing that part where I wanted it here, then group the date field. And I'll show you that in a minute once I go through all this. And then here, I was just asking questions if I was having trouble, like I was having trouble with the grouping. I was asking, okay, so how do I get the credit sales? And then here, I was asking, okay, so once I filter the data on the sales register, how do I transfer that to the pivot table? Give me instructions on how to do it. So they gave me option 2, option 1 here on top, and then whichever one I want to do. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm having trouble getting the two different pivot tables for cash and credit. They gave me step by step on how to fix it, more clear instructions. And they kind of told me, okay, are you still stuck? And I was like, okay, so after I do that, how can I solve the first task that I had asked, which was looking at the excessive credits. And then here, give me step by step on how to do it. And just showing me, and they also had shown me what it should look like on the pivot. And then here, I had to ask the question, okay, identify any employees with excessive credits. And here again, give me step by step again, showing me what the pivot table looks like. And then here I said, okay, how can I look at the difference between the cash received versus credit from the pivot table? Again, gave me option 1, which was the best one, and then option 2 to keep the separate pivot tables, and then option 3 bonus, which was even easier than the option 1 that they gave me. And then I kind of didn't understand these instructions, so I had asked the question again, okay, so I asked the question like, or the assumption that they had given me, which was the credits by employee, 7-day period should not exceed 0.15%. And then here they gave me kind of the final step-by-step solution, Excel friendly. And then here, once I did all these steps, I wasn't getting the same percentages. So I told it, this is the percentages I should be getting. So where am I going wrong? And then they kind of gave me the steps and then the common mistakes and then what I can do next. And then I had sent it a screenshot because I was still confused on what my pivot table looked like here. And then it was like, okay, they told me how to fix because I was getting something wrong. I needed to add one more column per employee per week, the total invoice amount. So they told me to fix it step by step. And then again, sent it another screenshot of what my pivot table looked like. And then here, and then told me, okay, everything looks good. Now just calculating the credit for each employee each week. And then once I did all that, I was having trouble with the pay special. I was like, it only gives you the options for uncode text and text itself. So they gave me a step by step on how to fix that. So then I was like, okay, so for example, I kind of asked, for example, Barbara Johnson take 85,489.9 divided by what? They're like, okay. They were like, okay, be careful for this. And then they gave me a full example of what to do, the summary. And then I was like, well, the answer is telling me Mary James is supposed to be 19%, but I get 5%. So like, okay, why you got 5% instead of 19%? And then they were giving me the real denominator, what this means. Let's confirm together. And then I sent it again what the answer should look like, the solution. And then they were like, okay, so what is the correct denominator? And then I was like, okay, can you show me the pivot table? And then they showed me how to exactly build the pivot table because I was doing something wrong. So I was like, we have to start all over. So I built the pivot table to show me what it should look like in the rows, which was very important. The date should go first and then employee. And then going on, I went on asking more questions, again, showing screenshots of what it looked like. And then at some point I did get it correct, the exact field names in the pivot table. And then they wanted me to clean up the pivot table, which was important, and then create the calculated field. But I was running again into the issues, so I kind of sent it screenshots of what the errors I was getting for the calculated field, and then kind of told me what was wrong with the formula and showed me how to fix it, and then the final steps. And then I was like, okay, well, I did that, but my percentages are off. I sent the screenshot of what it looked like. And they gave me fix the pivot table step 1, step 2, the calculated field. And then they also told me the alternative way, which I ended up selecting, which is copying the pivot table and then pasting as special as values. And then I made sure my pivot table was right. I sent them a screenshot of my fields. Again, I was incorrect in the denominator, so I fixed that. And then once I was doing this conversation back and forth with the pivot tables, sending them screenshots, I was also playing along in Excel and how to solve it an easier way. Find it. So here, like here you can see, I had said, okay, for the first question, I just put the pivot table as filters method, and then put the filters as the method, method paid, and then columns I put under it rows, type, and then rows I put employee and date, and then as the values I put underneath the sum of total and was able to get the same percentage. So I kind of worked with ChatGPT and also figure out my own way on how to do it, because sometimes chat can give you a more complex. So I was like, okay, well, this is how I did it as well. And they're like, okay, that's a simpler way of doing it. And then they kind of, now they were like, okay, now we have to do the calculation of the percentages. So they gave me option 1, which keep inside the pivot table, or option 2, create a custom percentages, or option 3, if the Excel won't accept calculated field names, just paste, which I ended up using it because I found it way easier than creating something in the pivot table. So I did that, and then I was like, okay, so how can I use conditional format on the cells? And they gave me that answer as well. And then I was running into the issue where at first I didn't know I had to do the absolute value, which then ChatGPT had told me to do. Once it wasn't working the conditional format, they told me to do absolute value. Here, as you can see, I was going into the issue, so now I needed to create an absolute value column. And then I did the same thing for part 2, where I sent them first the data, and then I sent them the question, the assumptions, and then here again, sending them the screenshots of what my pivot table looked like, the data, and how to fix or where I needed to fix it, and then chat would tell me, like I showed you for part 1. And then with this conversation, in the end, once I was discussing back and forth, giving recommendations of how I did things or how I wanted to lay out, and not too complicated, I'd asked it finally, okay, can you provide me a concrete, like here, or sorry, here, I kind of just told, okay, I just copy the data into a separate sheet as just values and use the formula, the sales receipt versus the cash receipts journal. So I did it that way instead of they wanted me to do a formula in the pivot table, which is just more complicated. So I did them. Can you just put that in the instructions? I did it this way. And then here in the end, I had asked ChatGPT just to give me a step-by-step with all the back and forth, all the review, and all the different things that we use. And here it says part 1, excessive credits, step 1, step 2 through 7. And then here, kind of week range, but again, we did the group days instead of the week, so it's just hits. And then part 2, excessive daily cash differences, and then steps 1 through 10, which is 10, which is finding the discrepancies. And then here, kind of what my Excel looked like, where I had the sales register. I had my sales register pivot table with what they wanted. Here, the same values as ChatGPT had said. And then percentages, again, copied and paste, copied the whole pivot table and then paste it as a special. Again, it was important to follow the format as ChatGPT had said, or I wouldn't have gotten being able to do the percentages correctly. And then going to the second part of the question, cash receipts journal first. Well, first I did the sales receipts journal like chat did first, doing the same pivot table, making sure I had the heading as SR cash, and then my CRJ cash receipts journal. Did the same thing, make sure I had my columns, and then pasted both of the both pivot tables as special values. So kind of just going to paste special as values, and I made another column for source, doing SR down to SR for that pivot table, and CRJ cash receipts journal for the other pivot table, copying and pasting it under one columns. So date, apply cash source like ChatGPT had said, and then I made a pivot table on that. I was able to do that then, doing again CRG, SR, the same format as they said, under the rows, columns, and values, and then paste that special as a separate sheet, then did the difference, again, conditional format, and then finding discrepancies which correlate to the answers that we should have gotten, and then same thing with part one, and match the answers that we should have gotten. So yeah, that's how I use ChatGPT. Mostly use screenshots and asked it more questions, or like I said, I didn't want to use codes, so I said, can we just not use codes? Just a simple flat out step by step. And then providing it also recommendations of how I wanted to make it easier for me and not to have it go around, because most of the time it did do that, where it made you take extra steps, especially in the pivot tables. It's hard to do rows inside of it, like formulas. So it was easier for me to do the copy and paste, which chat helped me with. But yeah.